as the last thing, I will try not to go over my time much more. Today, I'm going to actually play devil's advocate a little bit. I'm going to talk about concentrated solar power from the perspective of oil and gas companies and looking at the role that concentrated solar power play in the Gulf and in oil states. So here, for example, you have a very nice photo of green energy field that is used for oil extraction. I'm going to talk a bit about that momentarily. So first, overview here, I'll introduce the Gulf as a MENA market for oil. I'll talk about concentrated solar power as well and its place in Oman specifically. I'm then going to discuss what's called enhanced oil recovery. I'm moving to technical, inshallah. And then I'll talk about Oman's role in oil extraction and its place in the Gulf with relations to green energy exportation. Okay, so as I'm sure you all know, I mean, you can see from this map, inshallah, you can see where we are, and you can see a good overview of the Gulf. Now, the Gulf remains a very important market for energy because it contains roughly 66% of the world's oil and gas, and unfortunately, we still are very dependent on oil and gas. The flip side is it's allowed oil states in the Gulf to be very generous with welfare, to have excellent markets, but of course there's been problems with stability recently because of things such as the Arab Spring. There's also been, in 2011 and 2012, there were cyber attacks by fragmented groups that were politically motivated, and they specifically targeted oil and gas infrastructure in Qatar, oil and gas infrastructure in Saudi Arabia, causing quite a lot of damage and financial loss. Which brings me on to this point, the so-called oil curse. We all know oil is finite, and it's one day it's going to run out. But at the same time, many countries in the MENA region have been dependent on oil for their economy. Libya has historically taken 90% of oil revenues for its economy. Iraq has taken roughly the same amount. And so there's a serious problem of dependence on this kind of energy source. If we turn from that to concentrated solar power, in the long run, the idea is that you can build up an energy base that will be more stable, both politically and financially, and that will never run out. It's going to be infinite. The only downside here is that there's a lot of upfront investment you need to put in if you're going to run solar plants that will cover the entire country. But the Gulf is a very good case study because it has even sunshine throughout the year. It's very nice and sunny, and it's also quite a stable region. So is Jordan, by the way. So here, looking at Oman, Oman has a very important place in the Gulf, politically because of its ties to Iran and its excellent relations with Iran, but also because it's, as you can see here, it's on the very tip of the Gulf, so it has open sea access. It's the largest non-OPEC oil-producing country. It has roughly 5.5 billion barrels left as of 2012. But on the flip side, it's less attractive to oil investors. Oman's 5.5 billion barrels pales in comparison to Kuwait's 101.5 billion barrels of oil. And what this means is that Oman's always had to negotiate oil contracts that are against its favor. International oil companies have been able to get very favorable contracts out of Oman for this reason. And also because Oman's oil fields are fragmented, they're running out, and it's hard to extract oil from these fields. But on the plus side, what this means is that you have a situation where an oil state could actually be pushed towards considering green energy and solar power. So this is just an example. Here you can see this nice little graph. This is for what's called enhanced oil recovery. Now this becomes important when you have a situation where, as you extract oil from the ground, from a reservoir, pressure will drop. The more pressure drops, the harder it is to extract oil. Okay, and for this reason, because Oman is facing this situation, its state oil company, the Petroleum Development Oman, relies very heavily on enhanced oil recovery. So I don't know if you can see this from here, it's very clear, but imagine if you have 649 billion barrels of oil in the ground, and you have 377 billion barrels barrels that's discovered, but you can't extract it because the technology isn't there, the reservoir pressures drop too fast. Okay. So that brings me on to this lovely picture here, and what I call green steam injection. Without getting too detailed, when you extract oil from the ground, one of the methods you can use is to inject steam or heated water into the reservoir. And if the crude is not too viscous, this will encourage it to be pushed upward. And this kind of thermal heating, if you like, is very often fueled by gas. Oman burns up to 20% of its own gas supplies, just extracting more oil. Okay, so with the new technology that's being focused on concentrated solar power, you can use the sun's energy to heat the water and then inject steam into the reservoir to extract the oil, freeing up a lot of gas for exportation or for domestic consumption. So yes, if we look at green oil in general, as I like to call it, Oman, of course, has partnerships with international oil companies, BP, Shell, Total, and many of them have research and development departments for green energy, but not really for concentrated solar power development, certainly not related to oil and gas. And this is one of the things that sets Oman apart and CSP, its approach to CSP, apart from other uses, because Oman and other oil states, they're familiar with oil and gas, they're familiar with the industry and how it works. And if you then encourage a merging of solar power with oil and gas, in my opinion, you encourage these oil states to develop solar power more efficiently, you encourage it on a familiar base, and you encourage them to effectively start to transition from oil to solar power, but using a familiar base. And here I should mention an American company called GlassPoint that are very active in the Gulf. They've partnered with Oman, and they are basically they've been manufacturing these CSP panels and whatnot for Oman's usage. And their CEOs basically saying that Oman should be a role model. It's the first step to exporting this kind of technology throughout the whole Gulf. And this is something that interests me very much as a researcher because, let's face it, I mean, we're going to run out of oil sometime. The whole Gulf is going to run out of oil. And so I do think that this kind of approach is going to be very interesting in the medium to long term. And it might see Oman becoming a pioneer, should we say, for a new energy market in the Gulf. Now, what I'm hoping to see in the future is to see that Oman takes a more active role in its approach to green energy, that it goes from just importing CSP technology from, let's say, GlassPoint to manufacturing this technology and becoming a manufacturing hub for concentrated solar power. And I've also my research has looked at what's called the Desert Tech Project. I don't know how many of you have heard of this project, but great, this one. Good here. Too. Okay. And some of the research I looked at is, the possibility of exporting, if you have excess electricity that's generated in, let's say, North Africa and in the MENA region, exporting that electricity to Europe. Well, in this case, I tried to apply this idea to Oman and to Asia. If Oman, in the long term, could develop its own CSP base and from there, generate excess electricity, it could export that electricity to proximate markets that have been its oil clients. So here we're talking Japan, China, Singapore, India, and this becomes possible through what's called high voltage direct current, where you can export electricity over long distances using these cables. And when they arrive at their destination, you then put them on the conventional AC/DC grid. You convert the electricity. And I think Asia would certainly be interested in this idea because it needs energy, but it wants to be careful with its fossil dependence. I mean, China's growing. It's also buying up a lot of oil, but it's received a lot of criticism for its carbon footprint. And countries like China and also South Korea are looking to reduce this footprint if possible. At the same time, Oman should watch out for competition within Asia. Asia is not stupid. I mean, they're developing their own energy portfolio. So, you have here, for example, China has a very nice portfolio of biofuel, wind power, CSP, and they've subsidized this a lot. They provided a lot of subsidies to these companies. The only problem I can foresee in China is recently some of these solar firms, they have taken out a lot of loans and they start to hit a few financial problems that could affect their future development. Of course, Japan, I'm sure you all heard of the terrible Fukushima tragedy, which has encouraged Japan to increase its solar energy mix. And it's started to launch subsidy programs for renewable energy. It has its own domestic manufacturers, and it's also receiving international investment. South Korea, of course, has its own energy mix, and there's competition between some of these countries. South Korea has tried to export its solar panels to Asia, and China recently started to hit South Korean solar panels with very heavy taxes, heavy duties. It's clear that there's competition happening here within Asia. So to conclude, I've spoken a bit about enhanced oil recovery, of course, which is very important to Oman in the medium term and also the long term. And I think that it's going to encourage a new approach to green energy, to concentrated solar power that maybe a lot of people haven't thought of. Of course, PDO, the state arm of Oman's oil and gas sector, might try to become a regional model for green energy, and it might try to launch its own manufacturing base. But electricity export is a very long-term goal. There's Asian competition, and also right now there are technological limitations. But I certainly hope to see that in the future, Oman does encourage green energy development in other oil states in the Gulf. That's it. You're free to go.